Putin is panicked. The Russians have been losing an average of about 1,075 troops a day. Fedorov is thinking, let's do this better. Let's make something that is going to scare the Russians even more. Ukraine wants to take Crimea back, and it is Putin's jewel in the crown. It is a partnership of two isolated leaders running out of options. As the US agrees for Patriot missile licenses for Ukraine and Vladimir Putin finally admits he has a fuel problem, there are critical updates from the front lines. I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. Signals and intelligence show a distinct shift in the war. Mikhailo Fedorov's logistics lockdown campaign is working. The Crimea blockade is cutting the peninsula off. The tempo and power of Ukraine's deep strikes continues to increase. Putin is pulling air defense systems back to protect Moscow. Ukraine is exploiting those gaps using a mix of European and homegrown weapons to strike deep inside Russia. Rhetoric from Moscow shows a government in denial, but Russian society is feeling the pressure as the war comes home to Moscow and holidaymakers in Crimea. In the occupied territories, Zelensky's army is forcing Putin into a question: keep fighting at a terrible attritional cost, or settle? Off the battlefield, a diplomatic tussle highlights the burgeoning power and might of the Ukraine military. We'll analyse all of this and how one of Putin's proudest achievements is now target number one for Ukraine. But first, let's look at what's been happening on the front lines. Okay, first up, Ukraine has delivered a massive blow to Russia's military hardware machine. This footage shows three high-precision cruise-type missiles slamming straight into the VZPP-S semiconductor plant in Voronezh. Kyiv confirms this exact facility makes the microchips and electronic parts found inside Russia's Iskander-K, their cruise missiles, and their Kh-101 missiles, as well as their Panzer air defense systems. Look closely at this third strike. Military experts suggest that this is a British-made Storm Shadow missile. It could be a French Scalp, which is the exact equivalent. If true, the physics here tells a massive story. The export version of the Storm Shadow or the Scalp has a maximum range of about 250 kilometers. Voronezh sits exactly 250 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian border. That means Ukraine is either firing those weapons right from the absolute edge of their technical limit, or they have been given the unrestricted longer range versions that go up to closer to 500 kilometers. Either way, it proves that Russian air defenses are wide open. And these missiles don't fly in a straight line. They will fly a zigzag pattern to avoid enemy air defense, using its internal brain with mapping software that has got a 3D map of what the ground looks, and it'll hug the ground as it goes through. So 250 kilometers in a straight line is not how that missile will fly. It'll fly 350 kilometers to get that distance easily. So this is suggesting that it's slightly better. The gold standard version is what's been supplied to Ukraine. Next, look at Ukraine's logistics lockdown campaign in action. This drone footage shows a Russian pontoon crossing running right next to the damaged Chonhar bridge. And we have to remember the Chonhar bridge goes from northern Crimea, and the bridge was attacked by Ukraine earlier this month. The damage was such that they couldn't get their logistics across, put a pontoon bridge beside it. The main supply route was broken. Russian supply trucks were forced to use this temporary link, but forcing heavy vehicles into a bottleneck like this creates a massive risk. Watch right here as Ukrainian drone strikes a supply truck directly on the pontoon crossing. This is exactly what will happen on a much larger scale if the Kerch bridge is taken offline completely. Crossings like this will become the only option for Russian forces, not from Kerch in that direction in the southeast, because that is too much to cover with pontoon bridges, but it is in the north, and the Ukrainians are dominating that. Every supply convoy and every fuel truck heading into Crimea will be forced through these exact choke points, leaving them entirely exposed to Ukrainian drones. Ukraine is dominating the air in this region. On the maritime front, this clip is interesting. The Ukrainian Navy has released this footage showing the destruction of a reportedly Russian unmanned surface vehicle. What is fascinating here is the head-up display. The interface looks exactly like the one used by the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 drone. According to the Navy, a total of 3 Russian sea drones were destroyed in the Black Sea during this single operation. For a long time, we thought the threat from Russian advanced air defenses had pushed the Bayraktar off the front line. But this footage proves it is back, operating in a completely different role. The Bayraktar can stay in the air for over 27 hours, feeding real-time tracking data straight back to its commanders. It can stay out of range of ground defenses while hunting down and picking off moving targets at sea with smart micro-munitions. At roughly $1 to $2 million per unit, the TB2 is significantly cheaper than larger Western drones like the MQ-9 Reaper, making it an expendable yet highly effective asset against multi-million-dollar targets like tanks and air defense systems. This is a highly efficient way to clear out Russian sea assets without putting a single Ukrainian pilot or sailor at risk. What we saw there in that picture, with it being black and white, was a thermal imaging picture that allows you to see through the smoke, through fog, and in the dark, and identify these. The next level of thermal imaging is if you start to have drones with a radar imaging capability on it, and in particular synthetic aperture radar, and that can see moving vehicles and identify vehicles that are parked up under camouflage and anything else, as well as anything else that's metal. We're then getting into the game of what's called MASINT, measurement and signature intelligence. And you combine the two. If you combine the radar picture with the thermal picture, actually you can identify big lumps of metal, where they are moving or where they're static, and you can identify, looking at the thermal picture along the roads and routes that they've come from, where they've come from. And you can identify how long it's taken them to get there by looking at the thermal degradation of the heat signature that's left behind. That is measurement and signature intelligence. There's a lot of science behind this intelligence game. Remember the episode where we discussed Ukraine's new homegrown glide bomb? Well, this is the first publicly released combat footage showing it already in use, known as the Veronezh or the Equalizer. Watch it as it scores a direct hit on a fortified Russian position. This isn't a cheap conversion kit or a copy of Western tech. Ukrainian engineers built this entire system from scratch in just 17 months. It packs a heavy 250 kilogram warhead, that's a normal dumb bomb, and gives Kyiv a weapon that costs roughly a third of the American JDAM kit. So it puts a glide kit on it, and that glide kit can be targeted into the target. So it allows you to steer the bomb, turns a dumb airdrop bomb into a slightly smarter and longer range bomb. The speed of this development is a massive wake-up call for NATO and for the UK in particular. While Western procurement bureaucracy takes years to get weapons to the field, Ukraine is designing, testing and deploying ready combat hardware in only months. Crucially, because these bombs are entirely Ukrainian made, they come with zero donor restrictions. Kyiv can drop them wherever and whenever they want. And finally, it's not all remote drone strikes and deep battles turning the balance of the war. It's direct guttural fighting like this that is happening on the front lines as well. This incredible infantry footage was filmed near Zakatini on the Sloviansk axis. A lone Ukrainian paratrooper from the 81st Brigade was holding a position when a Russian reconnaissance squad approached. The drone footage tracks 3 Russian soldiers moving right up to his defensive line. Clearly, the drone operators were communicating with him to tell him that they were coming in. Instead of giving away his position early, the paratrooper waited until they were at point-blank range. He then struck them with a fragmentation grenade and followed up instantly with small arms fire. This clip highlights the extreme risk of infantry operations in areas with zero cover. It also shows the composure of these Ukrainian frontline defenders who are repeatedly stopping Russian reconnaissance teams before they can gain any part of the ground. And it's showing the sophistication of Ukrainian command and control, because this drone footage was clearly used to help give the situational awareness to the lone Ukrainian soldier, allowing him to defeat 2 and scare away 1 of the Russian attackers. Let's look at a key Russian ally on Ukraine's border. Where am I talking about? Belarus. The former Soviet Republic is a landlocked country. It also shares a border with Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, so NATO. Its leader, President Alexander Lukashenko, has held power since 1994. That's even longer than Vladimir Putin himself. He runs the country as a Soviet throwback, maintaining total political and economic dependence on Moscow. It is a transactional relationship. Belarus gives Russia geopolitical compliance plus potatoes, and in return, Putin places tactical nuclear weapons on their soil. Belarus has always been a major threat to Kyiv. It's exactly where the initial Russian invasion aircraft flew from way back just over 4 years ago. But a remarkable development just unfolded along the border. Zelensky gave Lukashenko a strict 7-day deadline. He demanded Belarus dismantle or switch off military signal relay stations in the Brest and Gomel region right on the border with Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence identified these ground towers as the tech Russia uses to guide long-range drone strikes on Ukrainian cities such as Kyiv or Lviv or elsewhere. Zelensky's warning was very clear. I think a week will be enough for him to do it. If he doesn't do it, we will. It was a direct threat of kinetic drone or missile strikes inside Belarusian territory. Lukashenko, who has spent months trying to publicly distance himself from the war, had his bluff called. He stayed completely silent in public, but behind the scenes, Ukrainian intelligence confirmed those target relay stations along the border had suddenly gone offline. This sudden border move comes as the Kremlin heaps pressure on Lukashenko to fully join the war. But this isn't anything new. Moscow has been doing this for the last 4 years, trying to get Lukashenko and Belarus to get involved. A Wall Street Journal report revealed that Moscow is desperate to launch drones directly from Belarusian soil to stretch Ukraine's front lines westward. A former Russian intelligence officer confirmed that Putin is threatening to completely cut off financial support to Belarus if Lukashenko refuses to comply. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov tried to spin the narrative, as he always does, claiming Russia will always stand by its ally to repel threats from Ukraine. But Lukashenko isn't buying the Kremlin's framing. Ever since 2022, he has stalled, deflected, and resisted committing his own troops or allowing mass recruitment by the Russian military. All of this tells us two major things. First, Kyiv is a military power with zero rhetoric gap. In other words, Zelensky doesn't bluff. Ukraine says exactly what it means, and leaders understand it will follow through with action. An example of this, just look at the capital itself. After hitting a sacred ancient monastery complex in Kyiv, Zelensky issued a stark warning to the Kremlin saying, if Ukraine burns, your Moscow will burn. Within 48 hours, Ukraine launched one of its biggest drone assaults of the entire war. They broke straight through the capital's dense air defences and blew up the Moscow oil refinery in Kapotnia. The facility is now so badly damaged it is expected to stay offline until at least 2027. Second, the signal relay shutdown exposes Belarus's total weakness and smashes the axis. Lukashenko knows he does not have the capability to defend his infrastructure from Ukrainian missiles and drones. The Russian air defense systems stationed there are simply not up to the job. For the first 2 years of the conflict, Lukashenko felt safe hiding under Putin's security umbrella. But Ukraine's massive retaliatory campaign has completely shattered that illusion. When Zelensky issued his ultimatum over the drone relay stations, he didn't just threaten Lukashenko, he exposed the fact that Putin cannot protect him and his 9 million Belarusians. Lukashenko looked north and saw Ukrainian drones flying straight through 3 rings of advanced air defences to set a Moscow oil refinery on fire. He realised that if his border towers stayed online, those same drones would easily reduce his own infrastructure to ashes. Lukashenko's sudden compliance shows exactly where the real power lies. By shutting down those drone repeaters, Lukashenko has shown he is trapped in a dangerous balancing act, desperately trying to keep Russian financial backing while refusing to let Putin destroy his country. When forced to choose between loyalty to Putin and absolute survival, the Belarusian leader will choose survival every single time, as he has by not getting Belarusian military directly involved in the war into Ukraine. It's all about his own personal survival. He knows that if his military gets engaged, they'll not be there to protect him, and the population of Belarus have risen up before to try and overthrow him. He can't risk that again. The relationship is not built on shared strength. It is a partnership of two isolated leaders running out of options. Now let's turn our attention to the black hole in Putin's logistics network, Crimea. Here we have it, to the south of Ukraine, close to Russia with Novorossiysk, the Sea of Azov, and the Black Sea. The peninsula isn't just a crucial military staging ground, it's highly symbolic. It's where members of Putin's inner circle and Russian oligarchs have their holiday homes. Putin even visited Crimea on his honeymoon in Ukraine back in 1983. Sevastopol, Crimea's biggest city and major port, holds a huge historical significance for Moscow. And here we have Sevastopol in the southwest corner of Crimea. The Chonhar bridge that I mentioned earlier is up in the north, and we have this marsh area with two bridges coming in from the north, from Russian-occupied Ukraine. And of course, we've got the Kerch Bridge, and the Kerch Bridge links this eastern part of Crimea to Russia. There were also ferries that used to go across that area, more of which in a moment. And if we remember back to 2018, Putin personally drove a heavy orange Kamaz truck across the newly built Kerch Bridge in a massive stage-managed public relations exercise. He wanted to show the world that Crimea was permanently chained to Russia. But Ukraine is systematically turning this prized territory into an isolated trap. And it is a prized territory. It was something that Russia and Ukraine shared. Sevastopol was the headquarters for the Russian Black Sea Fleet, even though Crimea is part of Ukraine. Ukrainians were happy with that until 2014, whenever the Russians came in and captured it in a bloodless coup. And that is what has changed everything. Look at recent attacks on the transport networks. Ukrainian special forces completely destroyed a vital railway bridge over the North Crimean Canal near Rozhdozhny. The tactics here were brilliant. First, strike drones took out the bridge itself. Then, Ukrainian operators waited for the Russians to bring in heavy machinery before returning the next night to blow up the repair equipment and the remaining structure. This is the first Russian bridge in Crimea to be entirely wiped out by strike drones since the war began. Combined with successful hits on Russian supply ferries and land and sea routes keeping Crimea alive, are slowly snapping. Final rail ferries have been destroyed, and these rail ferries came across underneath the Kerch Bridge effectively from Russia into Crimea and back again, but it was primarily one-way traffic. And with these rail ferries, the Ukrainians have been carrying out a campaign on the Kerch Bridge and the Kerch Bridge area for quite some time. We all remember the spectacular explosion over 2 years ago, where a truck bomb on the bridge blew up, blowing a couple of the spans off their supports and blowing one of them into the water, destroying the road bridge element, damaging the rail bridge element. It's got two elements through there. That took over a year for Russia to repair it. Ukraine has continued to attack the bridge. The traffic across it is now limited, and a lot of heavy trucks are not coming in. Those heavy trucks were coming in by ferry that went underneath it. There were 4 ferries that took railway trucks as well across. Ukrainians have destroyed those. Ukrainians have destroyed all of the air defences around the area, leaving the Kerch Bridge very vulnerable. As they're carrying out and continuing their operations against that, we have been reporting on their actions against the bridges coming in from the north. There is no other way to resupply Crimea because the Russians can't come in from sea Sevastopol has been closed down effectively as a Black Sea fleet port, and that has all been moved round to Russia into Novorossiysk. The Black Sea around Crimea, and now increasingly the Sea of Azov to the northeast of Crimea, is being controlled by Ukrainian air and sea drones. Putin is panicked. The defense intelligence of Ukraine has intercepted internal Russian documents assessing severe damage caused by Kyiv's long-range strikes. The Kremlin's response tells you everything you need to know about their vulnerability. Putin has ordered a massive redeployment of air defense systems, stripping them away from regional Russian towns and frontline occupied territories. Why? Because they have been ordered to protect just two perimeters at all costs: Moscow and the Kerch Bridge. Ukraine continues to destroy air defense systems on the Kerch Bridge, and there are not many left in other parts of Crimea to get there. By panic protecting his capital and his favourite bridge, Putin has left the rest of his forces completely exposed. As Zelensky rightly noted, Ukraine's commanders are drawing their own conclusions from this weakness, and they will exploit it. They'll exploit it more at the operational strategic level. Ukraine wants to take Crimea back. It is something that is at the heart of Putin's desire to invade Ukraine in the first place, and it is Putin's jewel in the crown. He had his honeymoon there. He sees Crimea as Russian. The Ukrainians realize that they can't carry out a land operation easily to invade and take Crimea back. They don't have the resources for Normandy-type D-Day landings to put troops in and take Crimea back. So what's the next best thing? Isolate it completely. Starve it. Make sure it cannot be used as a secure base for Russian attacks to be launched by air or by sea, a secure Russian base to store logistics and to use airfields, and somewhere that the population increasingly realize that the war or the protection that the Russians have said they can give to them has been lost. The Ukrainians are almost getting to the point where they're besieging the whole of Crimea by cutting it off. So if we look at what's happening to the Russians across the board, 2026 has been a particularly bloody year for the Russians across the whole of the front line. The front line is about 1,000 kilometers long, but we're seeing in the Donbass where the fighting has been concentrated and the Russians are still using their meat grinder tactics. What does this translate into? Well, it translates into, according to Ukrainian military intelligence, and this is supported by US, UK and NATO intelligence reports, the Russians have been losing an average of about 1,075 troops a day. Now that's killed and wounded. But if we then look at the Russian casualty evacuation facilities and their medical facilities, in Western statistics, when you're analysing killed to wounded, you probably get 4 to 5 wounded for every dead. When it comes to the Russians, because they're not getting that medical support up to the front, you're probably getting 4 to 5 dead to every wounded. So what's causing all these casualties? Well, we've seen from what's been happening in Crimea, a lot of it is down to Ukrainian drone technology. This is medium range and longer range drones. But on the front line, it's the short range drones that are in there. A drone is now being used as an anti-tank weapon. Instead of a shoulder launched one, it is one that is being launched by fiber optic cable over a 10 to 15 kilometer range. If you hit a Russian tank, that's 3 people dead. If you hit an armoured personnel carrier, that could be up to 10 people dead. But the FPV drones, the first-person view drones, are not just being used to take out vehicles or to take out groups of people. They're effectively being used as sniper rifles as well. And think of this is a sniper rifle that takes its sight with it over 10 to 15 kilometers, searching for a target. And when it sees the target, it hits it with the same accuracy a sniper would at 1,500 meters, 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters from a rifle. The nature of warfare on the front line has changed dramatically, and the majority of the casualties that the Russians are suffering on the front line are coming from Ukrainian drone operators. Drones are a significant change as to the way war is being fought. Now let's look at how Ukraine is building this operation and making such a success of its drone warfare, not just on the front line, but also in Crimea and elsewhere. Well, it starts with this man, President Zelensky. Zelensky is someone who is looking forward and building the teams that he needs to take the war to the Russians. Who's helping to drive Zelensky in doing this? Well, it's this man. This man is General Budanov. Budanov used to head up Ukraine's military intelligence, the HUR. We remember a lot of the operations that they carry out. He is a commando by background and has been known to go out and leave his ministerial position or a senior position and go out onto the front line and get a little bit more combat experience with his frontline troops and then come back again. He is a special forces commando by background, but he's been promoted. He is now President Zelensky's chief of staff. And as he was promoted, President Zelensky brought in this man, Mikhailo Fedorov. Fedorov is the Minister for Defense. And no, this is not an old photograph. He is that young. He's come from a drone background, a tech background. He is a tech thinker. He is a forward thinker. He's an innovator. So we've got a political force who's willing to think outside the box, supported by his chief of staff, a former military intelligence officer, commando, and forward thinker when it comes to special operations. He took the Second World War Special Operations Executive Manual and rewrote it for the Ukrainian war. Now supported by a Minister of Defense who is a young, tech-minded innovator and pushing things forward. Okay, so how have they taken this forward? Well, some of the slightly older technology that they've brought in to help dominate the Black Sea. Remember, Ukraine doesn't have a navy, but it has sunk and isolated the powerful Russian Black Sea fleet. If that would stand up against many navies around the world, it would be as powerful, if not more so. And Ukraine has confined them to port. How? Drones. Technology led by leaders, and this is the Sea Baby Sea Drone. The Sea Baby Sea Drone with a radar to guide it in, with guns to protect it, with air defense missiles to protect it, and to take the fight forward, and a huge warhead in the front of it. But that's not enough. Fedorov is thinking, let's do this better. Let's make something that is going to scare the Russians even more. And this is how Ukraine is planning to lock down the Black Sea and isolate Crimea even further. So, this is what we've got coming next. Dazzle camouflage. Look at the trimaran hull. Cool vessel. This is the newly unveiled Sirena unmanned trimaran, which has just made its debut at the Eurosatory Defence Exhibition in Paris. This is a major leap forward in drone warfare. The Sirena is a high-speed sea drone designed specifically to hunt down and shoot Russian warplanes out of the sky. It can charge across the water at speeds of up to 56 miles an hour. It can carry a heavy 300 kilogram payload and operate continuously for a full 24 hours. What makes this state-of-the-art trimaran a complete nightmare for the Russian military is its electronics. It has a built-in jamming system that blocks enemy communications, satellite navigation, and the control links of Russian drones across an 18-mile radius. It operates across a wide frequency range from 300 to 6,000 megahertz. That's providing an electronic bubble over the top of this drone that acts as a force field, stopping anything getting through it. For protection, it uses advanced radar and electronic warfare systems to scramble enemy autopilots. But its real teeth comes from a specialized launcher capable of firing the AIM-9M Sidewinder air-to-air missile to knock out Putin's patrol aircraft and helicopters. So if anything gets through the force field, the electronic force field that's around it, and can threaten it from a physical perspective, the A9M can take that out. Operating up to 500 miles from its command post, the Sirena can enforce a total exclusion zone. Combined with the massive long-range drone strikes hitting targets like the Kapotenia oil refinery inside Moscow itself, Kyiv is demonstrating total operational dominance. When Ukraine warns that Moscow will burn if Ukraine burns, they have the homegrown tech to back it up. And just think of the momentum of a vessel going at 56 miles per hour with a 300 kilogram warhead, and therefore the vessel itself is significantly heavier than that. That will punch its way into any port with relative ease, and it can get there with this iron dome around it. But could there be other targets? Well, Russia is beefing up its air defense around the Kerch Bridge. The Ukrainians will take that out with long-range drones from the air. Russia is beefing up its sea defenses and its blockades around the bottom of the Kerch Bridge and the supports out of there. Well, a number of these going forward with that size of warhead and the momentum will blow those out of the water and give a path for one or two of these to get through to the supports. The Kerch Bridge is a target and is something that Ukraine is building up to having another effect on, to impose explosively imposed sanctions onto Russia's continued occupation of Crimea. So that's all we have today, folks. Remember, if you like what you've seen, please share it amongst your friends. Hit like, and if you've got any comments or anything else that you want us to have a look at, put them in the comments down below. But thank you for watching today's Battle Plans Exposed. I'm Philip Ingram. Till next time, goodbye.